Hey friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
But I'm going to,
There we go.
Heyo, let's start again. Welcome to the Forward Rewind podcast. Let's start our podcast today by giving Matt a hand. He's working hard. He's doing a great job. Good job, Matt. Wow, that was the first time you guys actually followed instructions. Thank you. That felt good.
Because we're talking about mercy.
That's what it is. That's what it is. Welcome on this snowy day. It is sunny, then snowy, then it's sunny, then it's snowy. It feels good. I feel good because I did a workout this morning. Would you like to know what it was?
No, but you're going to tell us anyway.
I'm going to tell you anyway.
What was it, Blair?
It was pushing around a bum cart at the grocery store.
Oh, that's the worst.
That counts.
I don't like that when you get the bad cart.
That counts as a workout. My shoulder hurts, okay? And I was sweaty.
Did you have any kids in the cart while you were doing it?
Yeah, that's worse. Yeah, that's not good.
It was a cold day today, snowy. I had my winter coat on and I was like, oh man, but that cart was not going to win. So I pushed that sucker through the whole thing and I was like my quads were engaged and my core.
Wow.
And I was like, I don't have to work out later. Not that I work out, but, and I will tell you, I even had my long johns on too. They made fun of me, Matt, because I wear long johns when it's cold. And Derek said he wasn't for. And
Real Canadians don't wear long johns.
or is it the other way around?
No, it's not.
No.
Well, as I sit here sweating, I'm starting to realize that you might be right.
You don't spend most of your day in minus 50 in weather, Blair. The rest of the time, you're also got those long johns on and it's warm.
My husband keeps our house somewhat cool,
Okay.
Cooler than I prefer. But I think the school pickup and drop off is the reason for.
What is the thermostat argument at the Hicks house? Where would you set it? Where would Steve set it?
I would set it for 22. Steve would set it.
In the winter? Still? Yeah. That's really warm in the winter. Walking into 22 when it's minus 4 outside, I just feel like that's too much. In the summertime, sure.
There have been times when I have been like, whew, it's hot. And I'll go and I'll be like, oh, I had it at 22 and I'll turn it back down. Steve would probably have it at 18 if he could have it his
That's
way.
a little chill.
But he meets me in the middle.
A little chilly.
We do 21.
That's nice.
Sometimes I'll turn it to 21 and a half. Just to push his buttons.
when he's at work.
Welcome to Pastor Derek and Pastor Kirk. Kirk, you were at Kitchener this week. Did you have a good experience?
Yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah, I'm sorry that we were not there. I was mentioning that it was.
I'm taking it personally.
You are, because the last 3 times
I know you just keep skipping out when
and Keith was there.
you
too.
watch the preview videos to see who's preaching.
We're
Not coming.
Not coming today.
I'm gonna be sick that day. No, we were visiting family, but I heard it was a great week, and we were blessed with Keith coming by to lead worship. What does that mean for Matt? Matt, where were you?
Matt was here.
He was leading in Cambridge. Right on.
Here in Cambridge.
What an awesome week. And we are in week 6.
And we introduced the song. People don't know, may not know the new song that we sang on Sunday.
Was it a Christmas
song
one?
That was written by Matt.
Oh, sweet. At Cambridge, or did you do it in Kitchener as well? Oh, sweet.
Yeah, we introduced it here. I know it will be coming to Cambridge.
So
it will be coming to Kitchener. So
should we start practicing now then? I don't actually think I'm on next week. So I will learn that song, Matt. I'm excited now. It is week 6 of our God is series. God is merciful. Luke 6:32-36. I want to know, Derek, you and I have already talked about how awesome this series has been. And I would love to hear if there are any stories that you can share or would like to share regarding how God has been using this series to move within our church or our community. I know sometimes can't always share the stories, but maybe there are some.
yeah, well, this one, I've talked to a few people since Sunday. Mm-hmm. this one struck a chord with people because I think it's simultaneously such good news for our souls.
Yeah.
But the implications of what it looks like for us in our relationships really force us to wrestle with some stuff, right?
It's hard.
Yeah, especially when people have been hurt incredibly deeply, right? I mentioned a couple times on Sunday, I'm sure people would like to go back and rewind and listen to what Kirk had to say about justice, because that's what we want, especially for other people, right?
Yeah.
When we've been hurt, and the thought of being people who are called to show mercy to those who don't deserve it. I mean, mercy always is to those who don't deserve it. That's a tougher thing to wrestle with. It's great to hear on a personal level that God's been merciful to me, but just walking and talking through some people who just admitted, like, yeah, I need to show mercy, but this is going to be really hard. This is going to be really hard for me. And my heart feeling that this is what I feel when I'm speaking and recognizing there's some people who've been deeply hurt, right? And that's why I said I love this opportunity to discuss, because when you're talking in broad strokes about concepts like justice and mercy, you can't get into the nitty gritty of like, what does it look like in this situation? What does it look like when I've had a parent who just has not been the type of parent they should be, or a spouse who has abused me, right? Like, what does it look like to be a person who is both merciful and just?
Absolutely. I'm so excited for that. We get the podcast to as you say, dialogue rather than monologue. Do you have any stories that you could share?
Well, I think one of the things we talked about right at the outset is that we really wanted this series to be something to help grow our love for God as a church. And at the same time as we've been teaching this on Sunday mornings, a lot of the teaching in our youth ministry has been focusing on some of these same kind of attributes of God. So I just finished actually having a meeting with our youth leaders, and they were talking to me about the Bedlam retreat that our junior high students just went on. And this is a really cool story. The very first night and the very first kind of time of worship, where hundreds of students are in this room, they're coming together for worship. And Britt was telling me that right from the very first song, our entire row of students from our church just immediately entered into worship, and they were raising their hands kind of spontaneously and just singing out at the top of their lungs. And she said, I've never seen that from our students before.
Cool.
I've never seen them kind of really engage with worship to that degree.
And these are junior high kids, so that's kind of like you understand why you probably haven't seen that very often, because you're talking about 12 and 13-year-old kids.
Yeah.
So I listen to that. I'm like, that's just so awesome to see that, these students would go into that kind of space and just not wait to see, hey, is everybody around me going to do this? Like, they just immediately go and do it. It's just awesome.
I love that. We got to tell more stories. I'm going to keep that question in our queue of questions for podcasting, because I love hearing stories, and I know other people love hearing stories too. Without further ado, though, let's have our brief overview of your messages and the main takeaways. Do you want to start, Kirk?
Sure.
All right.
So we were in Luke chapter 6 and just talking about how God is merciful. And really, for me, I started off by looking at this perspective that a lot of us have been taught what mercy is. And we're often taught that mercy is you just don't get what you deserve to receive. But I think as you start to unpack the scriptures more, you see that mercy is so much more than that. Mercy, it includes that. It is the absence of receiving the consequences you deserve, but mercy is really the presence of kindness and compassion as well. And so we just kind of dove into a little bit more of what does that mean that God is merciful? What does that look like in our lives? And then, just moving into that command of, okay, God said you need to be merciful as well. And so I talked about how that looks like, how we have to be people who replace revenge with love, to be people who replace keeping score with actual genuine care for others, even when they can't do something for you in return. And then the reality of being generous towards people instead of holding debt over their heads. And Jesus talks about money, and that's very applicable in that situation. But I think the principle goes beyond finance. It goes to any debt that someone owes you, and you can hold that over their heads, or you can choose to be merciful towards them. And really, this is a picture of what Jesus does for us at the end of the day. And so the calling and the challenge is like, how do we become this kind of person? I know we're going to unpack that a little bit more, but just like it feels very overwhelming, and it feels almost impossible to ever truly be merciful as God is merciful. So is Jesus setting us up to fail? I don't think he is, but I think it's certainly an understandable emotion somebody might feel walking through this passage.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And you were right along. You guys were right along the same lines this week. Obviously, it's the same topic, but a lot. Yeah.
I talked about the same thing. What is mercy? And it's the fact that God, because of who he is, showers his compassion and kindness on those who do not deserve it. And so then I kind of dove into this reality that mercy is who God is.
Right.
Mercy is what God does. Mercy is what we need, and mercy is what our world needs. And looked at a couple of the things that keep us, I think, and hinder us from being people who are merciful as our Heavenly Father is merciful to us. I think there's some barriers, and fundamentally it has to do with a failure to understand the amount of mercy that we've been shown and what that mercy looks like. And the greater that we can grasp God's mercy towards us, the greater our capacity is to be people of mercy.
I love that. We got texted in questions this week. Well done, congregation. Before we get into them, though, I do want to sort of bring in the sort of other half of the topic. Justice was talked about a lot. That was week 4, wasn't it? So if you listen to this podcast, listen to these messages, go back though, listen to week 4, or listen to the podcast of week 4. God is just, right? God is, I was going to say justice. God is just, and you're going to hear and see some overlap, and it might help make even more sense as we learn and talk more about who God is. I'd love to hear my favorite question. If there was anything that stood out to you most during your prep or study this week, or was there anything you wish that you could have spent more time on and didn't get a chance to spend time on?
There wasn't anything that I wish I spent more time on. I think I was personally really just overcome with how amazing God's mercy is as I studied this passage. It was very humbling to think this through, and to think about different people and situations where you go, I'm not really, mercy is not my natural inclination in that situation. But to really sit back and go, but wait a minute, like, think about all the things that's real between you and God. And that was very, very humbling to sit and think that through. Yeah.
Uncomfortably humbling.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the other thing as I think about the mercy and justice kind of combination, if you will, sometimes because we tend to be a very linear society, we look at these messages as kind of standalone pieces, and sometimes systematic theology tries to kind of put things, and we create these little boxes that says, well, let's talk about this one subject.
Right.
And I think that what we forget is what we're talking about here is we're talking about a whole person.
Yeah.
So God is both merciful and just fully in both ways. So you have to be careful when you're listening to a message on its own or studying a passage on its own, that you understand that this is part of a whole picture. It's not the whole picture in and of itself.
Right. Yeah.
And that gives you some perspective as you're working through a passage like this.
Yeah. forwardchurch.ca and click on media, and you can go back and continue to listen to what is pieces of the full picture of who God is. Derek, was there anything that stood out to you?
There are times where you're teaching and you know that you can't make something land in somebody's heart, and you just really wish there was words that you could muster up that would help people realize the extent of something, right? I felt that with holiness, and I felt that with mercy this week. I just really, if there was some way that I could have just forced people to receive and understand how merciful God has been to all of us.
Yeah.
Because I just think that unlocks everything.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think not that I wish I would add more time to spend in the message, but I was thinking a lot about this week is kind of the state of our world and the state of our culture, and how the farther we get away from understanding of a God who is merciful, the more the state of a polarized, angry, divided culture makes so much sense, because I don't know any way to bring people together and to have people be gracious and kind and merciful and forgiving to other people without a basis of there's a God who's gracious and kind and merciful and compassionate to me, right?
Yeah.
You have to have a source that gives you the resources to be able to extend that to others, because mercy costs.
Yeah.
So unless there's something that is filling up your tank to be able to extend mercy to others, understanding you are receiving mercy, you just don't have the ability to do it.
Yeah, and that's so hard. I mean, you kind of talked about that in your message, just about making sense of just the world that we're in right now. And but for what it is worth, I know you said you feel like you couldn't find the words. I thought you did a great job. So, but here we are. We've got 3 texted, 3.5.
It's a half question. Is it like a statement in the form of a question?
It's like, well, you'll see.
Okay.
All right. So we got 3. Let's just go. Let's do this. You ready? What does it look like to show mercy to those that routinely exhibit negative and hurtful behavior? If an appropriate behavior boundary has been set for that reason, how do we still show mercy? I think that's good.
It's a great question. This is a great question. This is the kind of the thing that I was talking about, right? Is how do you delve into the intricacies of this in people's real lives? Because mercy will display itself in different ways in different places. Because mercy at its core is about how our heart is aligned to God's heart and what our heart towards another person is like.
Yeah.
So I'll let me just say a couple things to this. Okay. One, showing mercy to someone who has been harmful, hurtful, abusive to you means setting up boundaries.
Yeah.
Because allowing someone to continue to walk in wickedness and sin is not mercy to that person, right? It's the same. We know, most of us know this when it comes to people who are struggling with addictions. We understand that feeding that addiction for the person is not actually loving to the person.
Right.
And the same is true for someone who is an abuser. Continuing to give them the opportunity to abuse means continuing to give them the opportunity to be in sin. And so you should put up those boundaries. Now, the question then becomes, what is my heart towards this person? And I'll say, personally, I think there's a difference between deliberate unforgiveness and unforgiveness that you're trying to work through.
Okay.
So deliberate unforgiveness is like, I am going to hold this person to account, right? This is saying, I will have vengeance. I will be the one who holds justice. This goes back to the justice message.
Yep.
We have to entrust justice into the hands of God. Now, sometimes our heart isn't in that place because somebody has hurt us, and naturally we are feeling and struggling with feelings towards the person, right? And it's perfectly acceptable. In fact, again, Kirk has done a class on lament. This is a great point to walk through that class. If you're struggling with releasing these type of things, and just going to the Lord and say, I'm angry at this person. Yep. This person has hurt me, but I want to be able to release this, but I don't know how, right? That's a totally different posture. So there's that. I think, in the passages that we looked at, pray for those who have been unkind, who have hurt you, right? So you can still pray for somebody from afar. Bless those who curse you. You can, I think particularly of situations where I know couples have gone through separation and divorce. You can choose how you're going to speak about the other person. To other people, in front of your kids, you have the ability to make that choice to not say what you would be within your rights to say, right? And to just hold back. That's mercy.
Yep.
It's mercy when you don't call somebody evil who has acted in an evil way. And you just choose to release that into the hands of God. So there's a few things.
Anything to add, Kirk?
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo and say wholeheartedly, I agree. I think that sometimes, so let's talk about in an abusive situation. Mercy does not mean that you allow someone to continue to abuse you. You do need to have those boundaries. But what mercy might look like is yes, putting up the boundaries, but even one step further, that what your greatest desire is that the person gets the help that they need to be made right with God, to be made right with people, to get their life on the right track, right? That's mercy. It's a kindness, it's a compassion towards them to help them move in the right path. If you talk to people who serve in different community organizations who help people who are under-resourced, one of the things, and even when you're talking about missions and you're talking about showing mercy in missions, one of the things that often gets discussed is the importance of not just coming in and bailing someone out of a situation, but what you're doing is you're walking with someone to resource them and equip them and help them to make better decisions for their life. That's an act of mercy. It's like an act of kindness and compassion towards someone. Shout out for a book. Barry Sloan-White, who used to be the CEO of Compassion Canada, wrote a book called Strategic Compassion. And he really talks about some of his own beliefs that he's learned as he's engaged with people globally in the whole area of meeting the needs of people and showing mercy to people. So it is something that you need to do. So yeah, when you have someone in your life that's that person who's making life difficult, making life hard for you, boundaries are good and important to have, but sometimes we leave it at the boundary and because the boundary is what makes our life easier.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's good. It's important to have that. But compassion or mercy takes you to another step beyond the boundary.
Yeah.
Okay.
It forces you into a place where you want to act in any way you can to try to bring help to that person. Now, sometimes that's out of your control. Sometimes you can't do anything more. Sometimes it's a matter of praying for God to bring the right resources and people into that person's life. But even that's a very different kind of prayer than like, God, would you just smoke this person? Right? Like it's just a very different thing. And like, I remember when my parents divorced, my mom, who had, every right to be really angry and upset with my dad, my mom, one of the merciful things that she did in our situation, and I wouldn't say this for everybody's situation because it's not healthy in every situation, but what she did was she was very intentional to say, hey, I want you guys to be spending time with your dad. Like, I don't want to create this barrier that says you should never hang out with your own dad. And, that is an act of mercy towards my dad to actually promote and encourage a relationship between my brother and I and my dad when we were going through that.
I'll give an example. I read about a lady who had a spouse who had been abusive to her. They ended up separating and divorcing because of the type of person that he chose to be to all sorts of people. He didn't have anybody around him when he ended up in his final days at the hospital. She went and spent that time, the last 2 weeks, by his bedside, helping to care for him. She had not been in contact with him before because she knew she could put herself in a place where they would repeat the patterns of abuse. But now that he was in a space where he did not have the physical capability to do it, she showed mercy by being present in that moment when everybody else ran away.
Wow.
That's kind of this is again, it's about the heart. And I love what Kirk said there. There is an act of discernment in here, because you can even look at scripture and you can say, well, at some points Paul flees from those who beat him and persecute him, and he gets out of the city and escapes.
Yeah.
But then you come to Acts 20 and God kind of tells Paul, nope, you're going to go and you're going to stand trial in an unjust way, and you're going to stand there, right? And sometimes we have to just seek the Lord's discernment in when we stand and when we flee.
Yeah.
I love that. I think, did you say you read that story? Or
Yeah, I read that story.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing.
Yep.
I mean, we're talking about praying for them, and it kind of brings up memories of our friendship series, because I think we talked about this.
Claire.
I know, that's
Pulling
weird.
one out there, man.
I do not remember things, but for some reason, I remember that we talked about praying and how the power of praying for a relationship really changes your heart.
Yep.
Go back to our friendship series. Also go back to our Power of Prayer series. Wasn't that?
Yeah.
That was pretty recent.
Yeah.
And we mentioned Kirk's Lament class. That's on the website too, right?
Yep.
Forwardchurch.ca and click Equip, I believe. Curious, when you talk about unforgiveness, is that like maybe our fleshly way of giving justice or holding
for
out?
sure.
Absolutely.
For sure
Yeah.
it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But not like I don't forgive you and I'm waiting for the justice. It's almost like that is an attempt.
No, this is how I am
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
punish you. This is how I'm going. Part of the
Absolutely.
way I'm going to extract justice on
Yeah.
my behalf.
Like I even use the example of on a very kind of base level in marriages. You get into an argument with your spouse who does something that upsets you in whatever way possible, and you decide to give your spouse the cold shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
That is a form of taking justice into
It's a form
your
of
own-
punishment,
It's a
right?
form of punishment.
The thing with unforgiveness is that oftentimes the person who is failing to extend forgiveness doesn't necessarily realize this, but they only end up punishing themselves. The
Yeah.
other person moves on, moves along,
That's right.
and they're still stuck in a prison of their own unforgiveness and bitterness.
I was going to say which festers bitterness, which is a
Now, I mean, I know we're saying all this stuff, but I'm just putting myself in the shoes of
Yeah.
someone listening who's
Yep.
in a really tough spot.
Sure.
yeah, for sure.
And I'm like, I get it. Like,
Yeah.
I get why more than you can know. I get it why someone would feel upset about this.
Yep.
Or feel overwhelmed by this. Whatever your feeling is, like, I get it when we talk about mercy.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, you kind of both shared that from the front that you were feeling it this week with this.
I was very clear. This is tops in the category of things I wish Jesus didn't bother to say.
Yep.
You were very clear
Yeah.
with that. Okay, let's go to our next question, listener question. Let's come back to the one we mentioned before, but let's go to this one. Can we show mercy and come from a place of godly compassion and still long for God's justice? What does that look like? We've kind of talked about this already.
Yeah, I mean, you can.
Yep.
For me, this is a little bit of a picture of it's different words, but in John chapter 1, Jesus is described as being full of grace and full of truth.
Yep.
And so Jesus, in his perfectness, comes and he's full of both. It's not one or the other. We're talking about justice and mercy. It's the same kind of idea as truth and grace. And I think that all of us lean towards one or the other naturally. There are some of us that very much lean into justice, and there's others of us who are like, I don't want anybody to feel bad, and I just want to show mercy to everyone. And so I think that part of what you need to do is actually be self-aware of which one you lean into the most, and actually ask God to shape in you a little bit more of the other. So that you have, if you lean into being merciful, that you're asking God, like, God, help me to be someone who actually cares more about justice than what I do right now. Or if you lean more into justice in a situation, asking God, like, God, what does it mean to be merciful in this situation? And allowing the Spirit of God to work in your life. So that is always a starting point that I encourage people to, is that posture of self-awareness, asking God to kind of come and through the power of his Spirit to work in your life, to shape the other side of it in your life.
Yeah, sometimes I think we can forget that we can ask for that stuff, right?
Right.
Yep.
It's not necessarily on the forefront of what we're asking God for sometimes, but yeah, ask and you shall receive.
Yeah, I mean,
Right?
yeah.
Anyway, do you have anything to add to that one, Derek?
Yeah, I agree with Kirk.
Yeah.
I also think that, and I said on Sunday, I think that we tend to expect mercy for us and demand justice on others.
Right.
Right. And I think we have to flip that paradigm a little bit, where we go and extend mercy to others when we have been hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But when we see other people being hurt, we are those who stand up for
Yeah.
justice for others.
Absolutely.
And that's I think that's different than the way our flesh tends to lead us.
Yeah, for sure. It makes me think of, and I'm reaching here, but Steve and I were talking about Jonah and how at the end of the chapter he's really mad at God because he's merciful.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
he is.
He just experienced the blessings of God's
He says,
mercy.
right? He literally didn't want to go there because he knows what type of God he is. And this is exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And these were the enemies of the people of Israel. And he wanted them knocked down and smote, right?
Yeah. And he wanted
did exactly
justice.
what I said. And even when I didn't deliver the message the way that you asked me to deliver the message, you still did it.
Yeah.
So he sits and sulks up on the hill, right?
Which you read it and you're like, what a doofus. And then you're like,
oh, wait.
I'm pretty sure I do the exact same thing, right?
Yeah.
That happens a lot in scripture, at least for me.
And then he cries for himself when his shade gets taken away.
We are a lot more like Jonah than we actually
for sure we are. For sure
just
we
to
are.
pick up on what Derek just said a minute ago, one of the things I think we miss in Scripture is how many times, when it comes to injustice against us, how many times the Bible encourages us to let God take care of that.
Yes.
When it comes to injustice against others, how many times the Bible actually expects us to be the voice that speaks into that situation against others.
Yeah.
It is we live in a moment where it's like, I'm more upset about the injustice you've committed against me than the injustice that's being committed against other people. Yeah. And the Bible actually flips that around. We should be more upset at the injustice committed against other people than the ones committed against ourselves.
Wow. So, I mean, how do you figure, I guess it sounds like you figure that out, or you can identify it by seeing if the injustice is if it's personal, if it's towards you, versus like if it has to do with others. Is that?
Yeah, it doesn't mean
that you can't long for justice in a situation that you're in. But here's what justice means for us as Christians. I mean, justice can happen one of two ways. Either the person pays for what they have done that is unjust, or they come to a point where they repent and receive the fact that Christ paid for the injustice they've committed, right? And it's okay to pray that one of those two things. I often find myself in a position where I pray, God, either have that person repent and come to Jesus and be transformed, or do justice on them, right? But again, then I have the ability to leave it into the hands of God, who I know will do justice one way or the other because he's just.
Yeah, you've shared that before, that's how you pray for types of things.
Yeah, there are times where there's just evil going on, and I'm like, God, you either need to intervene in this and really turn the hearts. I'll tell you right now, like, I look at a guy like Vladimir Putin, right? And I pray either his heart is radically transformed by the gospel, or God takes him out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've kind of, when you shared that, I sort of analyzed how I was praying for that stuff too and adjusted accordingly. And I found it helpful because it just allows you to.
But there's a lot of people who have a hard time praying a prayer like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? Because it just doesn't feel very godly. So study some things called imprecatory prayers, and you will. Yeah, it's a big word. But it's throughout the Psalms. David has these prayers where he's just praying judgment and justice on people, and understand that this is part of the Christian prayer life. It is okay to pray some of those kinds of things, like what Derek just was talking about, praying for Putin.
Especially if it helps release you to be a person who can act in ways that are merciful towards other people, right? The only way I think sometimes that we can act in mercy towards others, the only way I can act in mercy towards others is that I know that God will do the right thing in this. If I'm worried that God's not going to do the right thing, then I feel like I got to hold on to the reins, that I've got to hold this person to account, right? Yeah.
For people who like control, that is something they grasp onto for sure.
Do you know anybody like that?
Nope. Oh, a little. This is excellent because I feel like we are talking about stuff that never gets talked about, which is always a good thing because that's what we want to do here. Why don't we go to our next question? Is it easier to have mercy when you have a transformational testimony? And maybe you want to start this one, Derek, because you got context on it.
Yeah. So this person, because I talked to them after church on Sunday, was just explaining, like, when you have one of those, like Saul to Paul type of realities where you recognize, man, I was totally way over here apart from God. I was killing God's people, and now God has radically grabbed a hold of me and changed my life. Is it easier to show mercy? Well, yes, because our ability to show mercy is directly related to our understanding of how much mercy we've been shown.
Yeah.
So for some of us, it's just much more blatant and obvious. Now, I said to this person, the funny thing is that doesn't guarantee that it will continue to be easier for that person to show mercy, because we can all get to a point where we start to take for granted the mercy of God in our life and start to think that, we're doing a pretty good job and people should kind of measure up to our standard.
Yeah.
So where you started doesn't necessarily mean that's where you're going to be in 5 years or 10 years.
Right.
But the thing that allows us to show mercy is understanding the amount of mercy we've been shown. Mm-hmm. And obviously, when you've come from a point where, like, I just am totally unworthy, then you are radically informed by the amount of mercy that you've been shown, and it makes it easier to show mercy to others.
I like that.
I have actually seen, though, and I don't know if you've seen this, Kirk, where people have had those type of radical changes, and they actually can become the least merciful towards people who are in similar circumstances to them.
Oh,
because they start to believe on the back end that they've been the ones who have worked hard to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and overcome where they've come from and overcome the sin. And they lose track of the fact that it's not just God's grace that saves them, but it's God's grace that transforms them.
Yeah.
And they start to have zero mercy for those who were in similar situations who don't walk the same road that they did.
It's a pendulum. What a pendulum swing there. Anything to add to that, Kirk?
I think that at the core of it, in order to become a merciful person, you have to come to grips with how great God's mercy has been towards you.
Yeah.
And so, sure. I think I can understand why it would be easier for someone who has that kind of very strong awareness because of their own personal experience. But I think it's for people who maybe haven't had that experience, I don't want to give them the permission to go, well, I didn't have that kind of an experience.
That's right.
So
That's right.
like,
You just need to you just need to work on realizing how much mercy you've been shown.
Right. Yeah. And so like many of our people in our church, I grew up in a Christian family. I don't remember a time in my life where I was like the guy who was murdering Christians. I just wasn't that person. I've been surrounded with church my whole life. I've been surrounded with the gospel my whole life. I can't tell you how many thousands of times I've heard the gospel message. And yet the one thing that I have had God impress on me is never take it for granted. Mm-hmm. And I've had seasons in my life where I found myself taking it for granted. I've had seasons where it comes time for a communion and you just sit there and you tune out for the 2 or 3 minutes of talking that happens before communion because you're like, I've heard this a million times. Yep. And I've been in that space. But I just pray that for myself and for our church, we never lose. I said this at the end in Kitchener. We never lose the awe of how amazing God's mercy really is.
Yeah.
That every single time we have communion, every single time we talk about Jesus, every time we celebrate what he's done for us, that we are just overwhelmed with a sense of awe of him and all that he's given to us. It is, to think of where we are today as God's people, and to try and think about where we would be if he wasn't in our lives is a pretty overwhelming thing.
Yeah, looking for it is kind of something that as we've talked about it this Sunday, and even just during this series, I try to look for it because, as we've said, you've mentioned before about boundaries and stuff like that sometimes, and we've talked about it, I think, in the Exodus series about how mercy doesn't always feel like mercy and grace doesn't always feel like grace. Yep. And your examples of like boundaries and the next steps after the boundaries, like that's, as you were kind of explaining that, I was like, that is like how God is with us, not necessarily with boundaries, but like how sometimes we are in situations that he doesn't pull us out of. And it's like, why is he doing this?
Yeah.
Why this? But understanding that he is mercy, he is merciful, and being able to find it in those situations can really change the way you go through it. Go through
Absolutely.
that valley of
Absolutely.
darkness, sort of.
Yeah.
I know I've always prayed in those valleys, get me out of here. But I've really had to change the way I pray. I pray that he would help me through it. And that was, I think, as we've learned about mercy, that's sometimes it doesn't look like mercy, and it actually really is, which you could be missing it. Look for it.
There's a reason why communion is a command, not a suggestion.
Yeah.
Part of the reason it's a command is because it is easy for us to lose sight of the extent to which we've been forgiven, right? So I talked about the parable of the unforgiving servant. Like he got forgiven an unfathomable amount.
Yeah.
But if you walk down the road in his life, and let's say it was like 30 years down the road, and all of a sudden he's got a large sum that's due him, if he forgets about the extent to which he was forgiven 30 years later, it's going to be easy for him to respond in a way where it's like, this is a big amount of money this guy owes me.
Yeah.
I know the story doesn't happen with that time length in between it, but I'm just saying we need to remember, because as soon as we forget, that's when we get into a place where we start to lose our ability to be merciful with people.
Yeah, absolutely. It is such a big topic. Are you ready for your half question? If your spouse wants you to turn off the Raptors game to watch Pride and Prejudice,
I don't know who would have said that.
Is it merciful to buy season tickets for the Raptors and free up the TV every night?
I don't think that is mercy. I think that would be foolishness, actually. Do you know what it costs to go to one Raptors?
But if you have enough money to buy Raptor season tickets,
Yeah.
I have an offering that you could give towards instead.
Sure. Yes.
I kind of had a funny feeling it was going to go down.
Yeah. I know where you could invest that money otherwise that will have eternal rewards attached
Exactly.
to it.
You know what? I call me next time and I'll come watch Pride and Prejudice with Amanda. You can go to my house and watch the Raptors
And watch
game.
the Raptors game at your house? Then I got to leave my house.
Oh, no. All right. We've got time for a couple more. I'll pull out some of mine here. How about us parents? As a parent, how can we explain, because we just talked about how mercy is heavy, meaty, full. How can we as parents explain mercy to our young kids in a way that they'll understand?
Well, one of the ways that you can do it is be a parent who's merciful, right? And then teach in it, right? Amanda and I have tried in our parenting to be intentional in our parenting. It's easy to fall into unintentional parenting.
Yeah.
Where we're just dealing with the situation in front of us all the time. We're just dealing with behavior, and we don't have a bigger vision and bigger plan for our kids.
Okay.
And in the area of mercy, sometimes choosing to not extract the justice that should be extracted on this child, and then explaining to them why you did it and how it's connected to God's mercy to them. There's nothing more powerful in the life of a child than a concrete example that they experience, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing from me.
Okay.
I would add to that. I think we've got a number of families in our church where their kids are incredibly merciful kids. That they are intentionally doing things to show mercy to people who are in need in different situations, people who have no capacity to actually do anything to give back to these kids. But these kids are doing things. And it's awesome to watch these kids kind of push their parents and say, hey, I want to do this to help these people out. But what the kids don't understand is they don't understand that those are acts of mercy.
Right.
They just see someone who's struggling. They're like, well, why don't we just help them out?
Yeah.
And I think for parents, I would just say something as simple as, hey, if your kids want to help out, affirm for them that actually what they are showing is the image of God that's in them, that God is merciful, and what they want to do as a kid is an act of mercy. And it's an opportunity just to affirm in that child how they are made in the image of God, and to connect words like mercy with a thing that's already in their heart to do, so that they begin to understand how those words actually play out in their life. And it's so, like, I just love watching kids in our church who are pushing their parents and saying, we got to help these people out, and we got to help those people out, and let's do this. And it's so cool to watch.
I love that.
Yeah, watch the way that you talk in your home about people.
Yeah.
Do you have a merciful tone about people who are struggling? Do you think about people through a lens of empathy or not? You know, we like to talk to our kids about empathy, and it's not always easy for me. I am a person who's like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, that's my natural tendency. And God has had to work on that in my heart and in my soul, and remind me, no, that you haven't done that. You may think you've done that, but you didn't do that. So just watch the way that you talk about people. Watch the way that you talk about people who are struggling, and people who are in need, and people who have even made their own beds, right? Who have caused mistakes that have caused themselves harm and hurt. Watch for a judgmental attitude in your heart, because that is the opposite of mercy, and it's not going to it's going to be tough for your kids to grow up and have an attitude when that has not been fostered in the household.
Yeah,
absolutely. I just started reading a book. I think you actually mentioned it years ago, Derek. Give Them Grace by Elise Fitzpatrick. And I just started it, so I can't speak too much into it. Did you read it? Or you had mentioned it?
I think I've mentioned it before, and I mentioned a book called Grace-Based Parenting before too.
Well, I can't speak to. I've just started it, but it's very relevant to kind of what you were talking about. So that there's a resource for you. What about this question? Maybe we'll wrap up with this one. What does mercy look like when we experience righteous anger? And this is coming from me. So my knowledge of righteous anger is what it is angry over the things that make God angry, right?
Yep, you got it.
Can you be angry and merciful at the same time? Or is that like a heart posture that is not together? If that makes sense.
No, I think this comes back to where we were a little bit earlier, right?
Yeah.
You can have both.
Yeah.
And it's good to have both.
Okay.
It's good to have righteous anger.
Yeah.
Nobody should ever, like in a message on mercy, if someone is sitting there going, oh man, I should stop being angry about things that break the heart of God.
Yeah.
That's not what we're saying at all. You need to be filled with a righteous anger towards things that God is angry at. To show mercy is, what does it look like to show compassion and kindness into that space?
Yeah.
And that's a very broad answer, because there's a million different situations where you can find yourself.
Yeah, but one point, I think it was you that made this point, Derek, was that helped clarify it for me, was talking about how Christ holds mercy and justice together, two contradictory things. And we can't, you sort of explained how he does that and how the cross does that. Yep. And it was really helpful in seeing how
it is. That is the cross, right? Yeah. The cross is where the fullness of God's mercy and the fullness of God's judgment intersect. And I love the fact that the cross is two beams.
Yeah.
Is where those two beams come together. There's no other way that it can be accomplished except on the cross, because God is fully merciful and he's fully just. And if he's going to be both those things, then Christ's death on the cross was the only way to fulfill the fullness of who he is.
I love that. Look, I even drew a picture. You want to see my picture?
There you go. Yes, you did. Look at that.
They won't be able to see it, but I wrote mercy and justice.
That's good.
Yeah, that's about as artistic as I get. Why don't we take a minute to leave our listeners with one last thought or encouragement that you want to mention to them before we wrap up?
I would just like to tell people, God is merciful to you. Mm-hmm. God is compassionate to you. He's kind towards you. Some people, when they hear this, it's funny. It's a struggle. When I was up there on Sunday, I was like, I don't want anyone to walk away from today feeling bad.
Right.
Because the reality is, even in when we have been unmerciful to others, God's compassion and mercy is enough for us. And so now we walk in that.
Yeah.
Right? If anything, if you feel like, oh man, all the ways that I haven't been unmerciful, the way that I've been unkind, that's a reminder to you that God knows that. He's compassionate. He's merciful towards you. He's forgiving of you in that. Repent from that, receive his mercy, and now go and do likewise.
I love that.
I would want everyone to go and pray and ask God to show you how merciful he has been to you. That you would never lose sight of the awe of this. Mm-hmm. And if you find yourself in a spot where this is normal language, you really need to pray and ask God to show you how great his mercy has been towards you. That would be my encouragement to everyone.
I love that. And if you are someone still in a posture of unforgiveness when it comes to justice, we did mention a bunch of, we kind of plugged like our lament class and a couple of series.
Tim Keller has written a great book on forgiveness.
Yeah.
Fairly new book.
Yeah,
and,
one of his last.
It is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's excellent.
Okay.
Excellent book on forgiveness. Okay. And, again, if anyone's struggling with unforgiveness and you just need some help to process and work through that, then, just fill out one of the counseling request forms and we'll be happy to have somebody meet with you and help you work through that.
And you can start. We've kind of already mentioned this. This is the same, whether it's doubt or whether it's unforgiveness, where those things where you want to, you can just start by praying that to God.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how to get there, but I want to get there.
Yeah.
I want to release this. I don't want to be in a posture of unforgiveness, and allow God to begin to work that out in your heart.
Yep.
And maybe spend the next month or a couple of weeks, your quiet time hanging out in Luke 6, 32, 36.
Yeah, but even better than that, go to something like Ephesians 1. Go to some place where you just see how much you have received from God.
Yeah.
Right? Under exactly what Kirk was saying. You're not going to become more merciful by telling yourself, I need to be more merciful.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You become more merciful by being more aware of God's mercy in your life.
Yep.
I love that. Next week, God is faithful, bracket hope. Well, if you don't want to come to a message that has bracket
because it's Advent.
Hope, it's
this Sunday is the first Sunday of Advent.
This is very exciting. So and I bet that wasn't even on their radar now. Now it is. So get excited for next week.
Well, if Christmas isn't on their radar, they need to get it on their radar.
I only just when the snow came, that's when I was like, oh boy, I got to catch up on my Christmas shopping. But I think that's the end of the podcast. I'm gonna go home and take off my long johns because I'm sweating buckets. But until next week, thank you for tuning in. See you later.